Afterwards, and for the same reason, the Babylonians showed an uncompromising attitude toward Jerusalem as well. Approximately 1 month after the city capitulated, Nebuzaradan, the chief cook, reached the city and began to destroy it systematically. We know this Nebuzaradan very well. His name, Nabu Zer Idina, is Nabu, God, the son of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, has given me offspring. And his title, the chief cook, Rab Nuchatimu. Nebuzaradan is referenced by his name and title as the first among Nebuchadnezzar's officers in a prism published by Unger already in 1931. There are 3 different traditions that indicate the date of Nebuzaradan's arrival, usually marked in Jewish tradition in the 9th of Ab. This is the day of the fasting on the destruction of Jerusalem. According to the second book of Kings, chapter 25, verse 8, Nebuzaradan arrived in the 5th month, which is Av, but on the 7th day of the month. According to the Lukianic version, it was in the 9th days of the month, which is according to Jewish tradition, but according to Jeremiah 52, verse 12, the date was fixed as on the 10th days of the month, accordingly the 10th days of Av. It is doubtful that one can decide which of the tradition is most correct or explain while there is no agreement between them. But it seems that the Lukianic version is secondary and later, and its purpose is to show that exactly 1 month after the capitulation of Jerusalem, the destruction took place. The gap between the tradition in the second book of Kings and that in Jeremiah can be explained by the author's lack of precise information or different traditions that prevailed about the date of the destruction. In any event, the beginning of the systematic destruction of Jerusalem, about a month after the king's flight and the capitulation of the city, is evident that this was not a spontaneous deed. It was a conscious political decision attesting to a strategic choice to obliterate the center of rebellion and to prevent its future rebuilding, so as to eradicate, once and for all, the seeds of the ferment and instability in Judah. Some scholars assume that the Babylonian delay in destroying Jerusalem was the result of waiting for direction from Nebuchadnezzar, who was delayed at that time in Babylon. I think that the Babylonians had allocated a period of 1 month to those who were responsible exiling the population from the city and the collection of the spoils, and afterwards allocated forces for the systematic devastation. Evidence of Nebuchadnezzar's intention to erase Jerusalem as a religious and political center may be found in the burning of the centers of government and religious ritual in the city, the house of the Lord and the house of the king, the palace. It is probable that the description of the burning of the major buildings in Jerusalem is based on true historical memories whose credibility can be attested by the finding of archaeological excavations in the city of David, particularly those in area G excavated by Eagle Shiloh, where a burned stratum was uncovered that is dated to the days of the Babylonian destruction. The totality of the devastation is highlighted in the description of burning all of the houses of the Jerusalem and every large house, as well as in the description of the tore down of the walls of Jerusalem all about. This is in verse 10. It is possible that by using the term all of the houses of Jerusalem, the author of 2 Kings chapter 25 is referring to the ordinary houses of the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Support for this theory may be found in a parallel version in Jeremiah 39 verse 8, which mentions the houses of the people. On the basis of the information, one may postulate that the purpose of this description was to generalize, stating that all of the residential homes in Jerusalem were destroyed. The expression, every large house, is unique, and it may refer to the largest and most important houses in the city, and by this, the author wished to encompass the destruction of all of the houses in Jerusalem. It seemed that the destruction inflicted on the city was exceptionally grave. The Book of Lamentations alluded to this destruction, and I can read only few short verses, like chapter 1, verse 4. דרכי ציון אבלות מבלי באי מועד, כל שעריה שוממין. Or I can continue to chapter 2, verse 15. ספקו עלייך כפיים כל עוברי דרך, שרקו ויניעו ראשם על בת ירושלים. הזאת העיר שיאמרו כלילת יופי משוש לכל הארץ? The Babylonian policy towards Jerusalem was also expressed in the exiling of its inhabitants. In the second book of Kings, chapter 25, verse 11, there is a description of the deportation of 3 groups to Babylon, and thus the author apparently meant to include everyone who had been living in Jerusalem even before the Babylonian siege. In the first group, ואת יתר העם הנשארים בעיר, the rest of the people that were left in the city, the author apparently referred to the military forces that remained in Jerusalem after its surrender. These military forces of some kind were not harmed in the battle over the conquest of Jerusalem and were captured after the fall of the city. It is likely that these were not the elite defending forces, or at least this is the attitude toward them, and that they include the defenders who were not killed during the long siege of the city, didn't escape the city with Zedekiah and all his men of war, and were not killed in the first weeks after the fall of the city when the Babylonian army was in Jerusalem. The second group, הנופלים אשר נפלו על המלך בבל, those who had deserted to the king of Babylon, consisted of those who surrendered themselves to the Babylonians during the siege. According to the interpretation that we already mentioned, the expression nafal el or nafal al refers to those who surrendered to the enemy. It might be reconstructed that the second group that was exiled by Nebuzaradan included those who escaped from the city during the siege. Some of these were military men and some were civilians who, in light of the situation, decided to flee. And you can see the description in Jeremiah 37 verse 12 or 38 verse 19. The third group, Yeter Hehamon, the rest of the multitude, include the rest of the populace of Jerusalem who were trapped in the city after the siege ended. This was probably a focused and well-considered form of deportation by the Babylonians. Inasmuch as economic, political, and religious elite were already in Babylon, the Babylonians must have carefully winnowed the exiles taken from the city according to the detailed directions that included, in particular, the removal of those elements that were likely to interfere with the establishment of the new arrangements. The conclusions arising from the description in the second book of Kings, chapter 25, verse 11, is that the intent was to define a total deportation of the residents of Jerusalem. This fits well with the entire description, which deals only with the destruction of the city without any reference to other parts of the kingdom. Against this background, the author could complete the description with 2 lists. The list of the tools that were shattered and plundered by the Babylonians from the temple, this is verses 13 to 17, and the list of some of the priests and the leaders of the city that were put to death by the Babylonians in Rivlah, and this is verses 18 to 21a, the first half of verse 21. These lists were intended to highlight the totality of the destruction and its irreversibility, and this is the basis for the summary statement in verse 21b, the second part of verse 21, where the description of the destruction comes to an end. Vayigel Yehuda me'al admato. Despite the unequivocal message that dictates the properties and intent of the description, it seems that this also reflects the historical reality in which the Babylonian campaign did indeed focus on Jerusalem, causing minimal damage to other parts of the kingdom. Evidence of this exists also in the archaeological findings that will be presented in chapter 6, as well as in the disappearance of Jerusalem from descriptions of the history of the people left in Judah after the destruction of Jerusalem and the deportation of the nation's elite. On this subject, as well as on the political, religious, and demographic status of Jerusalem after its destruction, we will focus in the next unit of this course.